Envision working for quite a long time at an organization doing everything right just to be informed you're terminated without advance notice. That is precisely what befell JN. However, what came next stunned everybody, even his chief. 7 minutes subsequent to being terminated, John gets a call that changes everything, except here's the contort: it's not just about his work any longer. Something a lot greater is going on in the background, and John's going to figure out he's not only a casualty in this game, he may be the way to everything. Stay blocked to figure out how one choice could flip around his life. Before we start the story, remark beneath and told me where you're watching from today, and in the event that you partake in this story, remember to hit that buy-in button for additional impending recordings. John had consistently viewed himself as a devoted specialist. He had been with ABC Corp for almost 5 years, arriving consistently as expected, never grumbling. Furthermore, continuously exceeding everyone's expectations. While he wasn't the most intense or most frank individual in the workplace, he ensured his work was done right. His associates regarded him and his manager, Mr. Carter, continuously appeared to see the value in his peaceful, amazing skill, or so John thought. The truth was, John never truly perceived the sort of individual Mr. Carter really was. He'd continuously thought the manager was simply severe, somebody who pushed his representatives hard yet basically regarded difficult work. Anyway, that morning as John strolled into Mr. Carter's office for seemingly a conventional gathering, he would gain proficiency with the stunning truth. Little did John had any idea about this gathering would steer his whole life in manners he was unable to try and start to envision the words that emerged from Mr. Carter's mouth next would leave John remaining there in dismay, attempting to comprehend what was going on. "John, we want to talk." "Mr. Carter," said his voice harsh as he signaled for John to plunk down. John had been brought to the workplace oftentimes previously, however this felt different. There was a briskness in the air that made his stomach contort with anxiety as he sat opposite his supervisor. He seen Mr. Carter wasn't taking a gander at him with his standard determined lack of concern. No, today there was something colder about him, something far off. John hadn't expected this equitable. The day preceding he'd remain late to wrap up a venture that he knew was basic to the organization's new client he dealt with through lunch, missed the company-wide meeting and, surprisingly, skirted his standard stroll to the cafe copyright to get the report. Great. So when Mr. Carter at last talked again, John's heart sank. "Your presentation recently," Mr. Carter proceeded with his eyes limiting, "hasn't been up to standard. I've seen a few mix-ups in your work, little ones, however they add up, and honestly I can't manage to have somebody in the group who isn't doing their fair share." John's brain hustled. Botches, what botches? He had twofold checked all that he thought about, all the late evenings, the early mornings, the end of the week spent dealing with projects that no other person thought often about. To hear this at this point, after all that work, felt like a punch to the stomach. Mr. Carter stopped checking out John with a penetrating look. "It's not just about the slip-ups," he expressed, inclining forward marginally. "It's about your demeanor. You've been as well agreeable. Perhaps it's time you continued on." John squinted, attempting to handle the words. "Continue on," he rehashed, as though the expression didn't have a place in similar sentence as his name. "What do you mean, Mr. Carter? I've been with this organization for quite some time." Yet Mr. Carter cut him off, his voice more keen presently. "I'm sorry, John, yet I've pursued my choice. You're terminated from this point forward." The words hit John like a cargo train. Terminated. His brain couldn't fold over it. He stayed there in dazed quietness, his mouth dry, his contemplations dashing. Terminated, very much like that. There must be some sort of slip-up. Perhaps Mr. Carter was kidding. However, John couldn't recall the last time his manager had shown any funny bone. Perhaps this was only some unusual test to debilitate a joke. In any case, investigating Mr. Carter's cool, unblinking eyes, John acknowledged it wasn't a joke. His manager wasn't joking. John stood up, leisurely inclination, the blood hurried to his head. He opened his mouth to dissent, to make sense of, to ask for another chance, yet the words wouldn't come. He was too dazed to even think about talking. Rather, he just gestured, his psyche numb with skepticism. He went to leave the workplace, his heart hustling, feeling like the floor was giving way underneath him. As he got out of the workplace, the sound of Mr. Carter's voice shouting toward him him blurred into the distance. "I'll have somebody escort you out," Mr. Carter had said. That was all there was to it. The entryway had shut behind him, abandoning him in the corridor. The heaviness of the circumstance soaking in John's grasp were shaking. How is it that this could be going on? John left the workplace in a daze, his brain a haze of disarray, outraging mistrust. His considerations were dashing, yet not even one of them seemed okay. He had never expected this, not in 1,000 years. Terminated for what? A little mix-up in a report that couldn't be the genuine explanation. Perhaps Mr. Carter had something individual against him. John had forever been undeniably calmer than the remainder of the group. However, he had consistently felt that didn't make any difference. Difficult work justified itself with real evidence, didn't it? He arrived at his work area, his legs frail as he sat down in his seat, the heaviness of the circumstance at long last beginning to get comfortable. He gazed at the screen before him, seeing only the impression of his own shocked face. How could he should tell his significant other they had recently purchased a house, his child had begun kindergarten hardly any weeks prior. He couldn't simply stroll in the entryway and say, "I'm terminated." He wanted this occupation. He took out his telephone, the quake in his grasp making it challenging to open it. The screen illuminated and he saw a text from his significant other. How did the gathering go? Can hardly hold on to catch wind of the new task. John gazed at the directive briefly, needed to answer, however the words wouldn't come. He was unable to force himself to come clean with her, not yet. Rather, he composed a fast reaction. It went, "Well, I'll call you in a piece." He put the telephone down, his psyche turning. A section of him needed to storm once again into Mr. Carter's office, request a clarification, request his work back. Yet where it counts, he realized that won't work. Mr. Carter had decided there was no going back, and that thought settled like a weighty stone in John's chest. He had nothing. As John stayed there, the minutes felt like hours. He was just going to snatch his things and leave when his telephone rang. It wasn't his better half, it was anything but a partner. The guest ID showed an obscure number. He delayed the slightest bit, then addressed high. A voice on the opposite end talked rapidly. "John, it's Imprint from HR. I really want you to descend to my office at this moment. We have what is going on." John's heart skirted a thump. HR? He didn't actually have any idea why they would have to converse with him. Perhaps they needed to go over the subtleties of his severance or something. He didn't care right now. It didn't make any difference. He simply had to make. However, at that point Imprint's next words halted him cold. "John, this is truly significant. You really want to come currently? It's about your work." Something in the manner Imprint said that made John's stomach wind. It wasn't the tone of somebody giving terrible news, it was critical. Practically like something surprising was going to happen. John snatched his things, scarcely seeing that his hands were as yet shaking. His brain couldn't concentrate. He was unable to shake the inclination that something peculiar was going on. He strolled rapidly toward the HR office, his considerations dashing significantly quicker. What might this at some point be about? John arrived at the HR office in record time, his means rushed yet precarious, as though his legs were moving without his authorization. The way to Stamp's office was somewhat a container, and as John ventured inside, Imprint was at that point on the telephone. He looked up momentarily, his eyes broadening as he saw John, and afterward immediately motioned for him to take a seat. "Hang on a subsequent," Imprint said into the telephone, and afterward he hung up, giving John a speedy gesture. "Gratitude for coming so quick. I didn't know you'd need to hear this yet. I believe it's time we clear things up." John plunked down, still uncertain what was going on. He could scarcely recall the most recent couple of minutes. His brain continued to replay the second Mr. Carter terminated him, how everything appeared to freeze completely still, like the world had quit turning. For a couple of moments it seemed like a terrible dream. Imprint's demeanor was serious, yet there was something different in his eyes, a gleam of criticalness that John couldn't exactly place. Mark inclined forward in his seat, his voice dropping to a lower and more classified tone. "Look, John, I don't have the foggiest idea how to say this, so I'll simply get focused. Mr. Carter, he's made a botch." John flickered, thinking he had misheard a mix-up. "What do you mean he terminated me?" "I realize," Imprint intruded on rapidly, "and I realize it doesn't check out. You were simply in his office, right, and he let you know he was letting you go." Jan gestured, still shocked. "Truly, choice was made without the appropriate endorsement. Mr. Carter doesn't have the foggiest idea about this. However, the organization has been arranging a significant advancement for you that was good to go up before he made his choice today." John's head turned. An advancement he had been turning out here for years yet he had never been enlightened anything regarding an advancement. Stand by what I don't have any idea. In the event that I should get advanced, for what reason did he fire me? Mark moaned, sitting back in his seat. Since Mr. Carter, well, he's been pushing individuals out of his specialty. He's been attempting to cut back without anybody seeing. However, you're important for a greater arrangement, one that he doesn't even know about yet. You are going to get another job, John, a vastly improved one. John's mouth went dry. He needed to express something, to pose more inquiries, yet his brain couldn't stay aware of everything Mark was saying. An advancement for him, it didn't seem okay, but then as Imprint talked, John couldn't overlook the premonition in his stomach, the inclination that something greater was unfurling here, something he hadn't seen coming. Imprint proceeded with his voice low yet firm. I've been told to save this calm for the present, yet things are going to change, and Mr. Carter won't be blissful when he figures out you're not being give up, John. You're going to be set in another job, and it will be a major one, yet until further notice we really want to keep this hush. Simply trust me. Alright, okay. John could barely deal with what he was hearing. Being advanced appeared to be so too far only a couple of hours prior. However, presently it was looking straight at him. He was being given an opportunity, an open door that no other person had some awareness of, not even Mr. Carter. However, the most confounding part, why had Mr. Carter terminated him, assuming the advancement was at that point in progress? Imprint appeared to peruse his brain. I realize it sounds insane, yet truly Mr. Carter is making some choices that are sketchy. You don't merit being in that. You didn't have any acquaintance with it, yet you've been chosen for something greater. It's simply that Carter is uninformed pretty much all of this, and he committed an error. He doesn't have any idea what's coming. John stayed there, his mind whirling. All that he assumed he had some awareness of his occupation about his manager had been totally flipped around, and however in his subconscious an irritating idea remained. In the event that this was valid, on the off chance that he was going to get an advancement, for what reason was Mr. Carter acting so cool? Why hadn't anybody told him? And why, after all that he had done, did everything appear to hang by a string? John took a full breath, attempting to consistent his considerations. So what now? He inquired discreetly, his voice scarcely over a murmur. Imprint's lips twisted into a half grin. However, there was no entertainment in his eyes now. We stand by and let things unfurl, yet trust me, John, things will get intriguing. John's psyche dashed as he made some meaningful difference. Office, nothing seemed okay any longer. The abrupt change from being terminated to learning he was going to be advanced felt like whiplash. His head was turning, and he was unable to sort out some way to handle this new data. He realized he needed to converse with his significant other. However, this moment there was simply an excessive amount of vulnerability to adequately articulate. He really wanted answers. He expected to sort out how all of this fit together. As he strolled back to his work area, his considerations were intruded on by a speedy tap on his shoulder. He went to see Claire, one of his collaborators, remaining there with a stressed look all over. Hello, John, you all right? She asked. Her voice was delicate, however there was worry in her eyes. I saw you leave Mr. Carter's office. Is all that good? JN delayed the slightest bit. He needed to tell her what had coincidentally shared the ridiculousness of being terminated and afterward finding out about advancement. However, he was unable to force himself to talk. Rather, he recently gestured and gave her a half grin, attempting to console her. Better believe it, definitely all is great, he said. However, it didn't feel fine at all. Claire didn't appear to be persuaded. You sure you've been here everlastingly? It simply appears to be peculiar. You realize Mr. Carter's been acting weird recently. Individuals are talking. John's heart skirted a thump. He had no clue about what CLA was discussing. However, something in her tone made him need to realize more. What do you mean acting abnormal? He inquired, turning down the volume. She looked around rapidly, ensuring no other person was listening. I couldn't say whether you've taken note. However, he's been pursuing a ton of unusual choices recently, terminating individuals without advance notice, moving individuals around. It's nearly like he's making room for a person or thing. I don't know, John, something's off. John felt a chill run down his spine. Was Mr. Carter sincerely attempting to clean house? However, at that point, why had John been designated, and why had Imprint expressed out loud whatever he did? Why was he being set ready for something important while his supervisor appeared to be running his own plan in the background before John could answer. Claire appeared to see his occupied look and immediately steered the conversation in a different direction. In any case, deal with yourself. Okay, you have many individuals here who value you regardless of whether Carter see it. She gave him a fast grin, then left, leaving John remaining there more confounded than any other time. He got back to his work area and plunked down his brain a hurricane of inquiries. There had to be more going on. Imprint had clarified that Mr. Carter knew nothing about the advancement except for assuming Claire's doubts were correct. It seemed like something was going on in the background that nobody should be aware of. And why had Mr. Carter acted so briskly toward him prior? Was it simply about a misstep on a report, or was there more to it? As John stayed there gazing at his PC screen without truly seeing it, the way to the workplace opened. He didn't look into promptly, however. At that point he heard the indisputable sound of Mr. Carter's strides coming toward his work area. John's heart skirted a thump and he felt a bunch fix in his stomach. The last time he had seen his supervisor, Mr. Carter had been terminating him without even batting an eye. What might he at some point perhaps need now? John, Mr. Carter's voice was sharp, slicing through the air like an edge. I want to talk with you. John looked into his hands, unexpectedly feeling damp. His brain was all the while hustling, however he realized he proved unable keep away from this discussion. Whatever was going on, it was occurring now. Mr. Carter's eyes were cold, similarly as they had been in the gathering. Follow me, he said, his voice firm. John delayed the slightest bit, however. At that point he stood up and followed Mr. Carter out of the workplace, a premonition developing heavier in his chest. He had no clue about what's in store, except for he knew one thing without a doubt: the last time he strolled down this passage his reality had been flipped around. Now it seemed like the story was a long way from being done. They strolled peacefully down the lobby, and with each step John's tension developed. What might Mr. Carter at some point perhaps need now? Later, all that had simply occurred subsequent to being terminated and afterward finding out about an advancement he hadn't even been aware of. John was nervous. Each nerve in his body was terminating, and his considerations were a tangled wreck of disarray and disappointment. They arrived at Mr. Carter's office and John was motioned inside. The entryway clicked shut behind him, and for a second there was just the low murmur of the cooling. Mr. Carter didn't plunk down, rather he stood at the window, his back to John, gazing out at the city horizon, his stance solid like he was daydreaming. John felt his stomach agitate. This wasn't the same man he had known for the beyond 5 years. There was a pressure in the room now that caused all that to feel unique, frightening at long last. After seemingly an unending length of time, Mr. Carter turned around, his look locked onto Jan. You're presumably asking why I gotten back to you in here, he said, his tone colder than any time in recent memory. John didn't have the foggiest idea how to answer. He didn't know whether he ought to be furious, confounded, or terrified. The entirety circumstance felt strange, like a terrible dream. He needed to compel himself to speak. I don't comprehend. You terminated me before, Mr. Carter. I don't have any idea what happened. What's happening? Mr. Carter's lips fixed, and interestingly John saw a gleam of some different option from cold separation in his eyes. Was it responsibility? Think twice about it. Was hard to tell. Look, John, Mr. Carter began, his voice milder now, yet with that edge of power. I realize what is happening doesn't make sense, however you need to comprehend it wasn't private. I needed to pursue a choice rapidly, and well, you're not by any means the only one who's been impacted by these progressions. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I had no way out. It wasn't about you as an individual, yet about the organization's heading. John tuned in, yet the words felt empty. This wasn't a similar man who had terminated him only hours prior. This wasn't the man who had let him know he wasn't adequate any longer, that his stir wasn't acceptable. John wasn't getting it. Why Jane begun, yet Mr. Carter lifted his hand, quieting him. In light of the fact that the organization is moving toward another path, there's been rebuilding, and I've been feeling the squeeze to cut back my area of expertise. I wasn't given any decision yet to make cuts. Mr. Carter's eyes dull-edged to the side as in the event that he was attempting to keep away from John's look. I committed an error. Okay, terminating you was a error, and I really want to fix it. John felt his breath get in his throat. Was this a conciliatory sentiment of some kind, or was it simply harm control? What do you mean fix it? John asked, his voice low. He didn't know whether he was prepared to hear the response. Mr. Carter's jaw fixed. He strolled around his work area, resting up against it, his hands caught together before him. I had barely any familiarity with the advancement, he said, his voice voice developing more tense. The higher-ups had proactively arranged it. They believed you should climb, John. However, I didn't realize that I acted without thinking. His voice mellowed somewhat, yet the sharpness remained. I made a choice I shouldn't have made, and presently I want to fix it. You should be elevated to a greatly improved position, a job with greater obligation, more acknowledgement. John gazed at him in incredulity. And advancement, a superior job. However, Mr. Carter had quite recently terminated him. He proved unable to accommodate the two. The words felt as they didn't have a place in a similar sentence. So what's the significance here for me? Jan asked, his voice scarcely a murmur. Mr. Carter stopped briefly, his demeanor garbled. At last he expressed, his words cut yet with a specific irrevocability. It implies that I will re-establish you. I will ensure that you're set in the place that was intended for yourself, and I will give my very best for ensure you're set up for progress. However, I really want you to comprehend something, John. Things are going to switch up here, and they will change quick. In the event that you will remain, you should be ready for what's coming. Jan felt his head turn. An advancement, re-establishment, and presently this what's coming, he asked, his voice tense. Mr. Carter didn't answer quickly, rather he strolled back to the window, gazing out again, his appearance incomprehensible. At last, he talked, his voice weighty with importance. There's more happening than you understand. Also, assuming you will be important for this, you should be prepared for the ride. This is greater than simply your advancement, John. There are things occurring in the background that you have hardly any familiarity with, and when you're back in, you'll have a front column seat to all that. John felt a shudder run down his spine. What sort of changes was Mr. Carter referring to? What had he found himself mixed up with? He couldn't say whether he was prepared for any of this, yet one thing was clear: this wasn't over by no stretch of the imagination. John left Mr. Carter's office with additional inquiries, then responds to his brain in a total haze. His head was all the while turning from the discussion and advancement that should be his. Mr. Carter conceding he committed an error, an organization rebuilding that nobody had tried to fill him in about, and presently this enigmatic cautioning about things changing. What might have been the meaning of that? He strolled down the foyer, his strides weighty, his considerations tangled. All that felt as was it happening too quick. Brief, he was being seen out, and presently he was being given an advancement he didn't even know existed, yet none of it felt genuine. Everything felt like an arrangement. He had zero faith in Mr. Carter. John had been faithful to that person for a really long time, and presently, only hours in the wake of terminating him, Mr. Carter was letting him know he played a greater part in store. Something didn't make any sense. If Mr. Carter truly had his well-being on a fundamental level, why hadn't he enlightened him concerning the advancement prior? Why hadn't any other person referenced it? Why hold on until he was basically out the entryway prior to uncovering it? John's considerations were hindered when his telephone hummed. He pulled it from his pocket, definitely knowing who it was. His significant other's name streaked on the screen, and briefly he wavered. How could he should clear up all of this for her? She had no clue about what was happening, and later all that had simply happened. He didn't have the foggiest idea where to begin. He swiped the screen and addressed, "Hello hun, John, are you alright?" Sarah's voice came through, bound with concern. "You said the meeting worked out in a good way, however you sound off. What's happening?" John took a profound breath, attempting to assemble his contemplations. "No doubts it's convoluted. Look, I'll make sense of everything when I return home. Simply don't stress, okay? I'm fine." He attempted to sound quiet, yet even he could hear the vulnerability in his voice. "John, what happened?" She squeezed. "You're startling me. You've never seemed like this before. Are you certain you're okay?" John felt a rush of responsibility washed over him. He loathed deceiving her, however at the present time he was unable to share the full truth. There was a lot to make sense of, and it was also befuddling. How is it that he could perceive her that he had been terminated? However, at that point, some way or another figured out he was going to get advanced. How is it that he could tell her that everything was changing in manners neither of them could comprehend? "Look, Sarah," he said, his voice more powerful, presently attempting to consistent himself, "I guarantee I'll let you know everything this evening. I just need a chance to sort everything out, okay?" There was a respite on the opposite stopping point. Then she talked again, her voice gentler. "Alright, yet don't keep me out of the loop, John. Anything that's going on, we'll sort it out together." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He realized she was attempting to be steady, yet at this moment all he needed was to comprehend what was befalling him. To them, to everything he assumed he knew. "Says thanks to Sarah, I'll be home soon," he said, his voice tight. "Later." Hanging up, John remained there briefly gazing at the telephone in his grasp. The foyer around him felt oddly tranquil. The world appeared to be moving around him, yet he was stopping, trapped in this hurricane of vulnerability. He had no clue about what Mr. Carter implied by things changing, yet he feared that the progressions wouldn't have been however basic as an advancement. He seemed to be as of now a piece of something greater, something he hadn't even started to comprehend, and if there was one thing he realized without a doubt, it was that his life was going to take a turn he hadn't seen coming. He turned and strolled toward the leave, his psyche actually dashing the way to the place of business open before him, and he ventured external, the virus air hitting his face like a slap. For a second he shut his eyes, attempting to consistent himself. The world hadn't quit turning, however he didn't know he was prepared for what was coming next. As John drove home, his psyche continued to return again to the same inquiry: why had Mr. Carter terminated him in any case? And the sky is the limit from there. Significantly, the thing was truly occurring in the background at ABC Corp. He was unable to shake the inclination that he was trapped, really busy finishing something far greater than a straightforward workplace issues game, something more obscure, and he had an inclination that anything it was going to find him. When John got back, the heaviness of the day had chosen him like a weighty cover. The natural sights of his road, his home, everything felt far off, practically incredible. He left the vehicle, his hands holding the guiding wheel somewhat more tight than normal. His brain kept replaying what Mr. Carter had said, the agitating way he had spoken about the progressions at the organization, and the secretive notice of things getting intriguing. He was unable to shake the annoying inclination that he was being maneuvered into something much greater than he could deal with. Inside the house, hushed up, Sarah wasn't in the family room like common, so John expected she was in the kitchen, presumably eating prepared. He took a full breath, compelling himself to quiet down. There was no simple method for making sense of this for her. How do you let your significant other know that you were terminated, then restored, and presently may be essential for something far greater than a advancement? John, Sarah called out from the kitchen. Her voice got through his contemplations. Is all that all right? You've hushed up since you got here. He strolled close to the kitchen, taking another full breath. Sarah was remaining by the oven, mixing something in a pot. Her face lit up when she saw him, yet there was as yet a hint of worry in her eyes. No doubt, JN said, driving a grin. I simply required a moment to deal with all that. It's been a peculiar day. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Bizarre, that is putting it mildly. You've scarcely said 2 words since you came in. John sat down at the kitchen table, running his hands through his hair. He realized he was unable to continue to stay away from the discussion. Sarah had the right to realize what was going on, yet how is it that he could make sense of every one of the exciting bends in the road of the day? It seemed like he was trapped in a tornado. Furthermore, the more he attempted to comprehend it, the really confounding it turned out to be. Okay, he said, his voice low. Here's the arrangement. I got terminated today. Sarah quit mixing the pot and went to him, her face loaded up with disarray. Stand by what terminated? However you said it went well. You let me know you were meeting with Mr. Carter about another task, not this. I realize. I know, John said rapidly, holding up his hands as though to prevent her from saying anything more. It was a complete shock. Brief. He was letting me know I was committing errors, that I wasn't doing what's necessary, and the following thing I realized: he let me know I was terminated. Very much like that. Sarah's face fell, her eyes wide with skepticism. Yet that is crazy, John. You've been working there for quite a long time. You've done all that they've asked. You've shown up on Saturday or Sunday, remained late, assisted, and this is the manner by which they reimburse you. JN gestured, his psyche actually faltering. From the discussion in Mr. Carter's office, it didn't sound good to me either. Yet there's more. Sarah scowled, detecting that something off. Do you mean there's all the more? Evidently, John proceeded, battling to find the right words. I shouldn't have been terminated. The organization had really been intending to advance me. They'd previously picked me for another job, a vastly improved job, yet Mr. Carter didn't have some familiarity with it. He acted without the real factors, and he terminated you without being familiar with the advancement. Sarah hindered, skepticism composed all around her face. Precisely, John said, his voice peaceful, and afterward, when I was practically out the entryway, I got a call from HR. Mark from HR let me know all that the advancement should be mine, yet presently Mr. Carter is, well, he's attempting to fix it. He's letting me know he committed an error, that I will get the advancement, that everything's Going to be okay? Sarah's eyes limited marginally handling what John had said. That doesn't sound right, Jan. Assuming they were wanting to advance you, for what reason did Carter fire you in any case, and why stand by? As of recently, to let you know something doesn't add up. Is he simply attempting to cover his tracks? John felt a chill go through him. He had been thinking exactly the same thing. The more he attempted to sort all that out, the more it seemed like Mr. Carter was concealing something, and presently, with the manner in which things had gone down, John couldn't shake the inclination that he was being utilized in a game he didn't completely grasp. That is what I don't have any idea. Sarah, he conceded, there's a going thing on in the background, something Mr. Carter isn't letting me know. He talked, are changing at the organization quick, and he's important for it, yet what does that even intend? What's truly happening there? Sarah plunked down the spoon she was holding and strolled over to him, her appearance mellowing with concern. John, I know this is a ton to process, yet you must be cautious on the off chance that things are essentially as bizarre as they sound. You should really reconsider. You simply stroll once again into that situation. I realize you really want this work, yet you should be certain you're not strolling into something you have zero control over. John took a gander at his significant other inclination. The heaviness of her words, he realized she was correct. However, there was as yet this pestering feeling somewhere down in his stomach, a feeling that things weren't just about an advancement any longer. Something greater was going on. Something that elaborate, something other than him, and he was unable to disregard it. I don't have the foggiest idea what's happening, Sarah, he said, his voice tight with disappointment. However, I can't simply leave this in the event that there's a greater picture. I really want to sort out what it is. I don't think I have a decision. Sarah moaned and put a hand on his shoulder. Simply be cautious, okay? I don't need you getting injured in all of this. John gestured, valuing her anxiety. He didn't have the foggiest idea what was to come. Held, yet one thing was clear, he was unable to turn around now. Whatever was coming next, he would deal with it directly, yet something told him that the hardest part was on the way. The following morning, John awakened dearer than regular, his brain previously hustling with considerations of the day ahead. He hadn't rested soundly. Every time he shut his eyes, his cerebrum replayed the discussion with Mr. Carter and the obscure alerts about things transforming. He was unable to shake the feeling that the choice to restore him wasn't so basic as it appeared. Why had Mr. Carter terminated him in the first spot, and why had things been so surged? His head was loaded with unanswered questions, and he was unable to stand to let them go unanswered any longer. As John got prepared for work, he continued looking at his telephone, expecting a lucidity of some sort or another, some new snippet of data that would make sense of this. However, there was all nothing, no messages, no updates, just quiet. Maybe the world was hanging tight for him to take the following action, and he didn't know he even knew what that move was. Sarah had previously left for work when he advanced ground floor. He couldn't shake the possibility of their discussion the previous evening, how unsure she'd sounded about all of that. She had attempted to be steady, however, even she realized that something was off, and where it counts, John knew it too. The drive to the workplace felt longer than regular. The roads were occupied with workers, yet John felt like he was in his own air pocket. As he maneuvered into the parking garage, he saw a couple of his colleagues staying nearby, talking in little gatherings. Everybody appeared to be identical, simply going through their day-to-day schedules, ignorant about the story street preparing just underneath the surface. John couldn't help, however, feel a feeling of detachment. Nobody realized what had befallen him the day preceding. Nobody understood what he was strolling into now. When he ventured into the structure, he saw the change in the air. Individuals appeared to be more tense than expected, like there was a fundamental current going through the workplace that everybody was attempting to overlook. As he strolled past the work areas, he saw the murmurs. Public were taking a gander at him, yet nobody was saying anything. He couldn't say whether it was since they were interested about the abrupt change, or on the other hand, in the event that they detected something was off base. Anything it was, John could feel it. He felt like a pariah in his own space. As he arrived at his work area, he saw a recognizable face. Cla was remaining there, her arms crossed, checking him out with a blend of concern and interest. She had forever been an example of the rare type of person who was thoughtful to him in the workplace, a minimal, more open, somewhat more able to share things. Others would mind their own business, yet today her eyes were different. There was an inquiry there, an implicit concern. John, she expressed discreetly as she moved Closer, I caught wind of yesterday. Are all of you right? I mean after what occurred with Mr. Carter's spec dab spot. She followed off, obviously uncertain of how to complete her sentence. Jane gave her a tight grin. I'm fine, he said, his voice excessively sharp, attempting to deal with all that CLA gestured, yet there was still the thoroughly search in her eyes, as though she knew something he didn't. She looked behind her prior to talking once more, turning down the volume. I would rather not alert you, however others discussion individuals are saying Mr. Carter's been making some bizarre moves around here, and well, I think you really want to realize. John raised an eyebrow. What are you referring to? CLA inclined in a little nearer, her voice dropping even lower. I don't have a clue about every one of the subtleties yet. I've heard bits of gossip about layoffs, and not simply the typical ones. There's discussion about the organization being sold. There's even some buzz that the higher-ups are getting new individuals to assume control over administration positions. It resembles the entire spot is going to go through a major shift. John felt a shock in his chest. An organization deal? Knew the executives. That didn't seem like the sort of information anybody ought to be hearing. Hush, and assuming it was valid, it would make sense of a great deal. The pressure, Mr. Carter's bizarre conduct, the unexpected terminating and re-establishing of representatives. Do you know much else? John asked, his voice somewhat more critical now. CLA shook her head, looking awkward. Not much yet to understand what's truly happening. I figure you ought to converse with Imprint. He's the person who called you yesterday, right? He has his ear to the ground, and I think he knows more than he's letting on. John's stomach bent. Mark from HR, a similar person who had let him know that Mr. Carter's choice was a misstep, a similar person who had dropped the sensation about the advancement. Okay, JN said, his voice low. Gratitude for the heads up, CLA. I'll converse with Imprint. As Claire strolled back to her work area, John took a seat at his own, his contemplations dashing. Something was certainly happening at ABC Corp, something greater than simply interior governmental issues, and on the off chance that Claire was correct, in the event that there were truly murmurs regarding layoffs and a potential sale, John was remaining in a lot greater tempest than he had at any point envisioned. He needed to make quick work of it. Whatever was going on at the organization, anything Mr. Carter was concealing, it wasn't just about him any longer, it was about all that. John took a full breath, attempting to consistent himself. He didn't have any idea what Mark planned to say when he conversed with him, yet anything that it was. John knew one thing without a doubt: the fact of the matter was out there. Furthermore, not set in stone to find it. John spent the remainder of the morning in a dimness, attempting to zero in on his errands, yet finding it unimaginable each time he took a gander at his PC screen. His brain floated back to the discussion with Claire and her secretive admonition about the tales drifting around the workplace. Cutbacks, organization deal. It was quite a lot to take in, and it seemed like a significant burden was pushing on his chest, making it hard to inhale. Around early afternoon he concluded he could stand by any more. He expected to converse with Imprint on the off chance that anybody had the responses, or at least some understanding into what was happening. It was him, after all. Imprint had been the person who connected with him after Mr. Carter terminated him, and on the off chance that there was a greater picture influencing everything, Imprint was the individual who could assist him with seeing it. John stood up from his work area, attempting to shake off the feeling of disquiet that had gotten comfortable his stomach. He strolled toward the HR division, his strides reverberating in the calm corridor. When he arrived at Imprint's office, he thumped delicately on the entryway. Come in, Imprint's voice called from inside. JN opened the entryway, venturing into the little faintly lit office. Imprint was sitting at his work area, figuring out some desk work. He gazed upward when John entered, his face momentarily illuminating cheerfully. However, it blurred rapidly as he saw the appearance all over John. Imprint expressed, motioning for him to sit. What's up? Each all that good? John burned through no time. I really want to understand what's happening. I addressed Claire and she let me know there are bits of hearsay about cutbacks in an organization deal. Individuals are talking Imprint, and I want to be aware if any of it's actual. Imprint's eyes gleamed with something, shock, perhaps responsibility, before he immediately peered down at the papers in front of him, as though trying to keep away from eye-to-eye connection. I can't actually discuss that, Mark said, his voice low. You know about the way things are. There are things occurring behind the scenes and a portion of it's over my head. John felt his disappointment mounting. Mark, I really want reality. I was terminated yesterday then, at that point, restored today told I was getting an advancement and presently you're saying yourself can't perceive me. What's happening? I'm not getting it. Imprint reclined in his seat, running a hand over his face. He murmured profoundly as though gauging his choices. Okay, look, I can't tell you everything except I can give you a tad. There are changes happening, huge changes. The organization has been failing to meet expectations in specific regions and upper administration has been scrambling to fix things. There's discussion of auctioning off portions of the business, perhaps selling the entire thing. A few divisions are getting cut back and others are getting rebuilt, and Carter, well, he's been under a ton of strain, more than he's letting on. He's pursuing choices without all the data, and that is where the missteps are going on. Joan felt his chest fixed. Stand by. So you're saying Carter had barely any familiarity with the advancement? He didn't realize that I was being set up for a greater job. Imprint shook his head, his demeanor clashed. He had no clue they'd been wanting to move you up, yet Carter didn't get the reminder in time, and when he chosen to fire you, he thought it was for execution reasons. He didn't realize there were greater designs for you. John handled this gradually, attempting to understand everything, so Carter hadn't been attempting to straightforwardly attack him. He'd quite recently been oblivious to the organization's arrangements. However, for what reason did it seem like there was another side to this? For what reason were every one of the bits of this puzzle so awkward? Is this why he's been acting odd? John asked, his voice low. I mean, yesterday when he terminated me he appeared to be changed. It was like he was cold, separated, and presently he's out of nowhere attempting to fix everything. Is he under examination or something? Imprint faltered. Let's just get real for a moment. I wouldn't be astounded assuming that there's a going thing on with him. He's been settling on a few problematic decisions recently, and I've heard murmurs that he may be in a tight spot. I don't believe he's the one calling the shots any longer, John. Whoever is giving orders, I don't think Carter is completely in charge of where the organization's taking. John reclined in his seat, attempting to assimilate all that Imprint had quite recently said. It was beginning to check out, yet it likewise opened up additional inquiries on the off chance that Mr. Carter wasn't in charge. Who was calling the shots in the background, and what was it that they expect from him? Imprint, is there whatever else you can tell me? Anything about the future, about what's truly occurring at the organization? John asked, his voice pressing. Imprint looked around apprehensively as though ensuring nobody was listening. Listen, John, he said, his voice dropping even lower. There are individuals at the top who are attempting to steer the organization toward another path, yet it's not about business. A portion of its very own. There's an epic showdown happening at present, and Carter isn't the one in particular who will be impacted by it. You should be cautious. If you are not cautious, you would get found out in the center of something way greater than you. John sat upright, the words hitting him harder than he anticipated. What do you mean greater? What sort of fight for control? Imprint shook his head, looking down. I don't have a clue about every one of the subtleties. It should be obvious that there are a few major players involved, and they're taking actions that aren't precisely legitimate. You must be cautious who you trust around here. I am simply advising you to keep an eye out. John's brain was reeling. He had thought something wasn't right at the organization. However, presently it seemed like the circumstance was far more regrettable than he might have envisioned. A fight for control, unlawful moves. This was as of now not just about an advancement, it was about endurance. Says, thanks to check, John expressed, standing up. I value you being straightforward with me. Be that as it may, I really want to sort out what to do next. Check gave him an apprehensive gesture. Simply be cautious, John. I'm letting you know things are going to get genuinely untidy around here. As John made some meaningful difference office, his considerations were whirling quicker than at any other time. In the event that there was an epic showdown happening at the top, in the event that things were going to get muddled, John needed to pursue a decision. He couldn't simply pause for a minute or two and hang tight for things to play out. Whatever was coming next, he must be prepared. John spent the following couple of hours at his work area attempting to act typical. However, everything around him felt like it was turning. Imprint's words reverberated to him An epic showdown on lawful moves, individuals at the top attempting to take the organization in a new course. His stomach let him know something was off base, something a lot greater than he might have at any point envisioned. Yet what could he do? He couldn't simply leave his work. He had bills to pay, a family to support. He had been faithful to this organization, and presently he was trapped in a fight for control that he hadn't even referred to existed. As the evening wore on, John's viewpoints kept getting back to Mr. Carter, the supervisor who had terminated him simply the other day and who had then appeared to think twice about it so rapidly. John didn't know what to accept any longer. Had Carter been essential for the game from the beginning, or was he simply one more pawn in a greater plan? Was he still reliable? John couldn't resist the opportunity to ponder what was truly happening in secret. What individuals weren't talking about there was an excessive amount of mystery, such a large number of weird things happening at the same time. But John realized he was unable to retreat now. He had previously ventured into an option that could be more profound than he had at any point expected, and assuming he was going to endure it, he had to realize more. His telephone hummed, interfering with his considerations. He looked down at the screen. It was Sarah. "Hello, hun," he addressed, attempting to sound easygoing regardless of the tempest whirling in his chest. "John, we want to talk." Sarah's voice came through sharp with concern. "I don't have any idea what's going on. However, I'm beginning to feel like you are concealing something from me. You've been acting far off, and I can tell something's not right. What's the deal with you and this organization?" John chest fixed. He despised maintaining mysteries from her, yet how is it that he could make sense of all of this? He didn't actually completely comprehend it himself. Still, he was unable to continue to lie. "Not to her. I'll be home soon, Sarah," John expressed unobtrusively. "There's a ton occurring at work. It's confounded. However, I'll make sense of all that, I guarantee." Sarah wavered. "John, I'm concerned. I know you're under a ton of stress. However, I want you to be straightforward with me on the off chance that something's off base. If you're in harm's way, or on the other hand, assuming there's a going thing on at that particular employment that is not right, I really want to know. I'm your better half. We're in this together." John shut his eyes, scouring his sanctuaries. His brain was in one places on the W. Yet Sarah merited reality. He simply didn't know whether he was prepared to recount her the entire story. "I know, Sarah," he said delicately, "and I will let you know everything except right presently. There's simply a lot continuing. Simply give me a brief period. I'll get back home soon and we'll talk, I guarantee." Sarah didn't say much else. She just wished him a tranquil farewell, and John hung up, feeling the heaviness of her words weighty on his heart. She was correct. He couldn't maintain going like this, keeping mysteries from her. However, everything was disentangling so quick, and he didn't have any idea where it would end. He gazed at the screen of his PC, attempting to push the sensation of fear down. He needed to find out what was happening regardless of the expense. When John left the workplace that evening, his brain was humming with unanswered inquiries and a developing need to get moving. The commute home felt longer than normal, each passing moment causing him to feel increasingly more like he was using up all available time. Something significant was happening, something going to change all that. He could feel it somewhere down in his bones, yet he actually didn't have the responses. The world external appeared to be typical: individuals driving home from work, kids playing in yards, lights glinting on in windows. Yet inside Jane everything felt different. The strain, the feeling of anxiety, it was suffocating. And however much he needed to imagine that all was great, he knew it wasn't. Nothing was fine. When he at last strolled through the entryway, Sarah was finding a seat at the kitchen table. Her arms got over her chest, sitting tight for him. She had obviously been anticipating him also. The second he ventured inside, her eyes locked on his. "John," she said delicately, her voice quiet however with an edge of concern, "we want to talk." Presently John remained in the entryway, briefly seeing her inclination, the weight of the day pushing down on him. This was all there was to it. He was unable to put it off any longer. He needed to tell her. However, where did he even start? He strolled into the kitchen. Dropping his keys on the counter, he plunked down opposite her, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah, I don't have the foggiest idea the most effective method to make sense of this. It's all events so quick. However, I really want you to realize that I didn't anticipate any of this." Sarah's face mellowed a bit, however she wasn't withdrawing. "John, haven't arrived to pass judgment on you. I'm Just stressed. I've been hearing things and I can perceive how focused you've been. Something's not right and I really want to comprehend what's happening. John gulped hard, the heaviness of everything crashing down on him. At the same time he took a profound breath and begun to express, his words coming more slow than he needed them to. Yesterday I was discharged. Mr. Carter told me I wasn't performing all right. He said I wasn't cutting it and that I was done, very much like that. However, then something bizarre happened. I figured out that the organization was wanting to advance me. They had currently picked me for another job. However, Mr. Carter didn't have the foggiest idea about that, and at the point when he terminated me he had hardly any familiarity with the advancement. And presently, well, currently I'm in the center of an option that could be greater than I at any point envisioned. Sarah's eyes enlarged as she listened. You were terminated and afterward they enlightened you regarding advancement. John, that has neither rhyme nor reason, I realize, he said, shaking his head. However, that is not even the most peculiar part. There's discussion about cutbacks and the organization may be sold. I've been hearing bits of hearsay that there are individuals at the top attempting to assume command and things aren't what they appear. Mark from HR, he let me know that Carter isn't in charge any longer and there are individuals making things happen in the background. Individuals I don't know, John. Sarah said, her voice tight with stress. Are you letting me know that the organization you've worked for such an extremely long time is self-destructing? Are you, as a matter of fact, trapped in a battle for control? Joanne gestured gradually. I assume I am, and I don't have any idea how to receive in return. I'm stuck, Sarah. I don't have the foggiest idea who to trust and I don't have any idea what will occur next. Sarah sat in shocked quietness briefly, her hand gradually arriving at across the table to press his. You should be cautious, John, in the event that all of this is truly happening. Then, at that point, you're in more profound than you suspect. You can't simply continue to stroll into that office consistently like everything's typical. You need to sort out your best course of action. John gazed down at their hands, feeling the heaviness of her words. He didn't have any idea what to do. However, one thing was clear: he was unable to continue onward down this way without understanding what was truly happening. He needed to figure out who was behind the progressions, who was pulling the strings, and he must be prepared for whatever came next. You're correct, he said discreetly, gazing towards Sarah. I can't continue imagining all is great. I really want to make quick work of this. The next morning John felt a need to keep moving that he hadn't encountered in years. He was unable to sit back and let the tempest at ABC Corp consume him any longer. Everything was going wild, and keeping in mind that he didn't know where it would all lead, he realized he needed to make a move. The drive to work hushed up the heaviness of the circumstance pushing down on him with each mile. He replayed the discussion with Sarah from the prior night in his head. Her words had stayed with him. You need to sort out your best course of action. That was the issue. He didn't have a next move. He was trapped, really busy doing something a lot greater than a basic advancement or cutback, something more perilous, with individuals in power making things happen in the background. Yet John wasn't going to stand around lazily and sit tight for the inescapable on the off chance that this was a game. He needed to sort out some way to play it. When he showed up at the workplace, the environment felt weighty, as though everybody was strolling on eggshells. The typical chat was stifled and individuals were looking around anxiously as though sitting tight for something to happen. John saw a couple of new faces in the passage, individuals who looked as they didn't have a place in the structure. They were wearing costly suits, strolling with reason as though they possessed the spot. John's heart skirted a thump. Were these the higher-ups? Imprint had referenced individuals who were calling the shots. As John advanced toward his work area, he attempted to shake off the feeling of fear that had settled over him. However, when he plunked down, he understood there was something else. His PC screen streaked with an email notice from corporate relations. It was a conventional name, and John's heartbeat stimulated when he saw the title: Earnest Gathering Demand Quick Activity Required. He delayed the slightest bit. This could be it. The second when he found out precisely exact thing was going on away from Plainview. Was he being brought by the new power players, or was this simply one more piece of the corporate chess game he was presently caught in? One way or another he proved unable. Disregarded. He clicked open the email. The message was short, immediate. Dear John, you are mentioned to go to an earnest gathering today at 2 p.m. in the chief meeting room. Your presence is expected for the conversation in regards to your impending job and company rebuilding. This gathering is critical to your future here at ABC Corp. Kindly affirm your participation as soon as possible. Best respects, corporate Relations Group. John gazed at the screen, his brain hustling. This was all there was to it. He was being brought in most likely for the advancement he'd been told about, yet might it at any point additionally be tied in with something different? Was this his opportunity to at last find a few solutions about the organization's future? He didn't know. However, he realized he was unable to stroll into that room ill-equipped. The gathering was hours away. However, John couldn't stand by. He paced around his work area, pondering what he knew up until this point, bits of gossip about cutbacks, a potential organization deal, and Mr. Carter's abrupt change in conduct. Everything appeared to be associated at this point some way or another. None of it made once more sense. His telephone hummed and he looked at the screen. It was one more message from Sarah. I've been thinking about the previous evening. I realize you need to do your thought process is correct. However, guarantee me you'll be cautious. This doesn't feel like simply a typical work issue. In the event that you really want to retreat, you can constantly leave. Don't take a chance with everything for a task. John felt a ache in his chest. He realized she was stressed. However, he was unable to turn around now. He had come this far and pulling out wasn't a choice. He needed to own this. As the clock ticked toward 2 p.m., John felt a rising feeling of fear in his stomach. The pressure in the workplace had just deteriorated, and the second the hour shone up he stood up from his work area, his legs feeling heavier with each step. The leader meeting room was on the highest level, concealed from the remainder of the structure, providing it with a quality of mystery. As Joe strolled toward the lift, his brain hustling was sitting tight for him in that room. More responses, more lies. He didn't know. However, one thing was clear: this gathering would change all that. The lift tried appeared to take always the entryways slid open on the top floor, and Jane ventured out into a smooth cleaned corridor, an unmistakable difference to the rest of the workplace. This was the core of the organization where the genuine choices were made. He strolled a few doors down to the gathering room, his palms perspiring regardless of the cool air around him. When he went into the room, he was right away welcomed by a couple of new faces. They were situated around a huge oval table, all wearing suits that seemed as though they cost more than John's month-to-month lease. A lady in her mid-40s rose up to shake his hand. She was tall with sharp highlights and a demeanor of power that made John quickly mindful of her power. In the room, Mr. John Harris, she said, her voice smooth however directing. We're happy you could go along with us today. Kindly grab a chair. J.N. sat down toward the finish of the table, his psyche hustling as he attempted to keep his poise. He perceived none individuals around the table. However, a couple of them gave him looks that made him anxious. As he plunked down, the one who had welcomed him proceeded with, I'll get focused. You've been selected for another situation here at ABC Corp, one that will put you at the focal point of the progressions occurring inside the organization. Yet before we go into the particulars, we need to talk about a portion of the new choices that have been made, seeing your job as well as a few different issues that worry your future here. John's heart started to race. This was all there was to it. They were at last going to let him know, truly continuing. However, as the lady kept talking something about her, words didn't sit right. We should start with the terminating, she expressed, looking at a man situated close to her who slid an organizer toward John. The choice to fire you was made rapidly and without full information on the circumstance. That was a slip-up. Anyway, considering your potential, we are offering you another job, one that will make you a vital participant in the organization's rebuilding. However, grasped John that this accompanies conditions. You should demonstrate your devotion to the new heading we're taking. John's psyche was turning. Another job, conditions. The words felt weighty, like they conveyed more weight than simply a proposition for employment. What were they requesting that he do? What did demonstrating his devotion truly mean? The lady proceeded with her eyes cold. We want somebody who will line up with our vision and do whatever is important to guarantee the outcome of this change. This isn't a period for faltering. Do you figure out? John's throat went dry. He gestured gradually, yet inside the alerts were ringing. This wasn't just about an advancement any longer. He was being maneuvered into something a lot greater and a lot hazier than he had ever envisioned. John stayed there, his psyche dashing, attempting to deal with what the lady was saying. Demonstrate your unwaveringness. The words reverberated to him, every syllable more agitating than the last. His contemplations were blurred blurred the heaviness of the circumstance preceding him with each passing second. This wasn't just about an advancement any longer. This wasn't tied in with ascending the professional bureaucracy. This was about endurance. The lady proceeded with her voice consistent yet cold, as though she were making sense of something that ought to have previously been obvious to him. In this new job you will approach data. What's more, assets that are basic to the organization's future. We're entering a momentary stage, John, and during this stage we really want pioneers who won't hesitate to go with difficult choices. She stopped as though sitting tight for him to answer. John gulped hard, attempting to keep calm. He had come into this gathering expecting to find solutions to comprehend what was truly occurring at ABC Corp, yet presently it seemed like he had coincidentally found a game where the guidelines were being made up on the spot. Let me get straight to the point. The lady inclined forward marginally, her eyes restricting. There are powers influencing everything inside the organization that you don't completely have any idea. Individuals are attempting to reshape this business, and not every person will endure the progressions. You have the potential to lead however you want to. Pick your unions shrewdly. This is a period for activity, not delay. John felt a virus shudder run down his spine. This wasn't the work he had pursued. This wasn't just about ascending the professional bureaucracy. This was tied in with picking sides in a fight he hadn't even known existed, and he was being approached to settle on the choice in a moment. How do I have at least some idea who to trust, he asked, his voice scarcely over a murmur. The lady's lips twisted into a little practically vague grin. That, John, is something you'll need to get a decent grip on, yet trust me, the best decision will turn out to be clear soon enough. John checked out the room, meeting the eyes of the others accumulated at the table. None of them talked, however the quietness between them was weighty, accused of an implicit strain he felt like a pawn in a game he didn't completely comprehend, with each move having the capacity to represent the moment of truth, his future. However, he wasn't a dolt. He knew one thing without a doubt: individuals in this room were not on his side. They were important for something greater, and John was being maneuvered into the center of it. Regardless of whether he preferred it, you'll have the chance to show what you can do beginning today, the lady said, her tone last. We'll screen your execution intently. Don't dishearten us, John. With that she stood up, flagging the finish of the gathering. The others followed after, accordingly standing and leaving the room without a word. John stayed situated, briefly attempting to handle all that he had quite recently heard. Substantiate yourself, pick your coalitions carefully. It felt like a game, however the stakes were higher than anything he had at any point envisioned. He stood up leisurely, his psyche turning with questions. What had he recently found himself mixed up with? Who were these individuals, as a matter of fact, and in particular what were they arranging? John left the gathering room, his heart beating in his chest. His psyche was a tornado of contemplations, every one more upsetting than the last. He had strolled into that gathering thinking it was a straightforward discussion about his advancement, yet presently he felt, as was he, remaining at the edge of a precipice with no thought what direction to bounce. As he strolled back to his work area, the quiet in the workplace appeared to be stronger than any time in recent memory. The air was thick with strain, and everybody appeared to be approaching their work as though nothing had changed except for John realized better. He realized that the game had changed, and presently he was in it. He took a seat at his work area, his hands shaking somewhat as he opened his email inbox. There were many uninitiated messages, however one specifically gotten his attention. It was from Claire. John, I'm stressed over you. I've been hearing things and I don't think you're being recounted to the entire story. Be cautious, trust nobody. The message sent a chill down John's spine. CLA had forever been the sort of individual who realized more than she let on, and presently it appeared as she was cautioning him about something, an option that could be greater than the advancements, the cutbacks, or the corporate rebuilding. John gazed at the directive, briefly gauging his choices. CLA had been an example of the rare type of person in the workplace who appeared to think often about him, yet might he at any point trust her, consider the possibility that she was simply one more player in the game. His telephone hummed, interfering with his viewpoints. It was a message from Sarah. John, please, I'm, truth be told, stressed. Kindly gotten back home soon and converse with me. Something doesn't feel right. John's chest fixed. He hadn't told Sarah everything, except she had realized something was off. He was unable to continue to conceal this from her. She had the right to realize reality regardless of whether reality terrified him. However, presently, with all that event so quick, John couldn't say whether he could safeguard her from whatever was coming on the off chance that things were all around as awful terrible as they appeared. Could he, truth be told, keep her protected and all the more critically might he at any point guard himself? As he stayed there gazing at his telephone, John felt the heaviness of the choices in front of him. The game had changed and the options he made now would decide the remainder of his life. He shut his eyes briefly, taking a full breath. This wasn't just about a task any longer, it was about endurance, and if he planned to get he required to have been savvy. He expected to take the smart actions. He didn't have all the answers, yet he knew one thing: the clock was ticking. When Jane left the office that day, his head was swimming with considerations. The gathering had left him shaken more than he wanted to concede. The lady from corporate, the subtle provocations, the unobtrusive strain to demonstrate his faithfulness. Every little thing about it felt wrong, yet presently, like never before, he understood how profoundly he was implanted in something that went the distance, past straightforward workplace issues. As he got into his vehicle, the world outside felt quieted, as though he was seeing it through a haze. Each step he took, each move he made felt determined, like he was strolling through a labyrinth, and every decision he made could lead him more profound into peril or proposition him an exit plan. His telephone hummed again. One more message from Sarah. Where are you? I'm truly frightened, John. If it's not too much trouble, return home. John's heart gripped. She was concerned. He realized she was. Nevertheless, he hadn't even started to sort out some way to safeguard her or even safeguard himself. He was unable to tell her every bit of relevant information. However, he wasn't prepared yet. He realized he was unable to continue going like this. Something needed to give. He pulled out of the parking area and headed toward home. However, as he drove, his psyche held floating back to the office. The power players, individuals calling the shots in the background. Who were they? What was it that they expect from